Hi, I'm your host, Zach Hale, and this is Play the Ink, a podcast where we discuss the composer performer relationship with living musicians and the way that the composer can change the way the performer performs and the performer change the way the composer composes. Today on the show, we have James O'Callahan, who is a composer and sound artist based in Montreal and is praised for his mastery of materials and musical form. Originally from Mount Curie, British Columbia, he received a Master of Music degree in composition from McGill University in 2014, studying with Philippe Leroux, and received a Bachelor of Fine Arts honors degree from Simon Fraser University in 2011. He also co-founded the Montreal Contemporary Music Lab, served on the Artistic Committee of Codexis, and served as a national counselor of the Canadian League of Composers. Next, we have flautist Jeff Stonehouse, who is a co-founder and artistic director of Ensemble Paramirabo, a new music group formed in 2010 whose mandate is to promote music by emerging Canadian and Quebecois composers. A proud ambassador of local contemporary music, the ensemble is the winner of the Opus 23rd edition Performer of the Year Prize and was nominated for the Juno 2020 Prize, Classical Album of the Year, Solo or Chamber Music, for their album Alone and Unalone in partnership with composer James O'Callahan. He is the winner of the Soundscape International Festival Performer Prize and is currently interim flautist with the Nouvel Ensemble Moderne and serves as an administrator on the board of Groupe Le Vivier. He holds degrees from McGill University, Conservatoire de Musique de Montréal, and Wilfrid Laurier University. So we're going to talk to each of you individually first, just to see your path in music. So I wanted to start with James, and it's something interesting for me because just reading about you a bit online, I don't believe that you say you've played an instrument. You didn't learn an instrument in school. So how did you get into music? And you can correct me if I'm wrong with that instrument part. But how did you get into music and then kind of go into the university and do all that stuff?
Thanks so much for having us on, Zach. It's a pleasure to be here. In terms of my musical background, I grew up in a tiny little town called Mount Currie, Pemberton area. It's a bit north of Whistler in British Columbia. And didn't have too much access to things like music lessons there. Apparently, there was one piano teacher in town who was really mean, so my parents didn't want me to enroll with them. And so didn't really have any music in my early life until we moved to the city, Vancouver. And it wasn't really until my undergraduate that I started to study music. And I took a course in electroacoustic music at Simon Fraser University, not really knowing what it was, but at that time I had started really to get into like electronic dance music, and I was kind of making some on my own through a tracker that I downloaded online, very self-taught. And as I was doing this for fun, I found that I kind of wasn't so interested in coming up with tunes and things like that, but I was really interested in working on the sound. And so, like, I thought maybe I'd go into production or something like that. And discovering electroacoustic music, where there's a whole world of art that's based around that, was so exciting to me. And so that was really my hook into music. And then at the time at Simon Fraser, it was a requirement to also take instrumental composition classes, which I took at first begrudgingly, but I really fell in love with the process of collaboration, where in electronic music, you have immediate feedback on the sound that you're working on. You can kind of sculpt as you go. But if you're composing for somebody else to interpret later, whether it's written or communicated in some other means, there's this kind of time delay or some delay between you and the realization of the sound, which I found so compelling and so interesting. And that kind of excitement of, writing something, kind of having a sense of how it sounds, and then delivering it to a performer in that moment of, wow, okay, this is amazing. It's better than I thought, or this I have to change, or this, all of these things. It's such an exhilarating thing. So little by little, I started getting really hooked on writing instrumental music, and now I'm a little bit all over the place. I mix the two very often. I mix installations. I'm back to making electronic dance music again after a break of about 15 years. Yeah, I wish it was 15 minutes. And working more and more with multimedia in my work. My studies were also interdisciplinary, so I initially went to school to do film and ended up veering into music. And so drawing on all of those different experiences, I try to make multi-sensorial, multimedia work here and there in different formats, but predominantly I work in the classical music world with new music ensembles and things like that. So here I am.
Very nice. So just interesting for me, who were some of the early like kind of electronic music people that you heard in undergrad that kind of said, "Oh, that's really interesting."
Like mentors?
Or even, historical figures, that were doing electronic music. I don't know, Stockhausen, Xenakis, and you could name a bunch of other people, but
Sure, in that world. Well, so I think going to school at Simon Fraser was a real revelation because the genre of soundscape music that's developed there by Barry Truax, Hildegard Westerkamp, R. Murray Schafer, and others really kind of made me inspired by the idea that music can be something more than just sounds, right? So I was really hooked on, okay, there's this genre of electroacoustic music where you can really sculpt the sound. And I was so interested in composers like Bernard Parmigiani or, in the more popular world, I was really into like experimental electronic music, like, industrial stuff like Skinny Puppy and Strzelny Neubauten or Amon Tobin doing more like IDM. And finding a genre of music that was really like, okay, it can be about something, it can be about the broader world, we can talk about social issues, we can talk about a personal identity, we can talk about the environment that we live in through music, was pretty exhilarating for me. And so that's something that I keep with me in my practice.
yeah, that's very interesting. I'll get to that in a second. But then also, so you went to McGill, and I forget who you studied with. Was it Philippe that you studied
Yeah, I
with,
studied
or?
with Philippe Leroux and was kind of lucky because I had applied to University of Montreal as well, where he was on a temporary contract, and had kind of wanted to work with him as somebody who really had a foot both in the acousmatic world, having studied at the GRM, and in the sort of mixed instrumental world, having taught at and worked at IRCAM. And so it was really just luck of the draw that he ended up switching to McGill at the time that I ended up doing my master's there. So ended up working with him. He was a great teacher there.
Very cool. Yeah, like I said, he was on the last, or not the last one, the second episode we had, and that was something to me, was very interesting. That he was like, yeah, basically acousmatic or whatever, electronic music kind of person, and that's where all of his inspiration comes from. So that's interesting because I feel that way in your music too. When I listen to it, it's very similar in that kind of way where it comes from that. And I also just wanted to say I was listening to you have a YouTube video on the Earchem forum that I was listening to talking about Alone and Unalone, which I thought was very interesting. We'll post the video if people want to watch it afterwards. But I feel like a lot of your work, like especially in that piece, is just so interesting. The philosophical or kind of like really thinking about how do people listen internally or what is external and these kind of ideas. And again, like I think a lot of times you hear people talk about music and it'll be about I wanted to do this tone cluster, I wanted to do this, and it seems like you're very more philosophical in thinking about like the situation that people are in or what experience they're going to have and what's interesting about the experience, even of I'm in a room, I'm sitting down, I'm listening, I have things going on in my life. So um, yeah, I think that's interesting. So what made that kind of what made that more interesting to you to kind of think about those kind of things rather than just like purely musical, but like you said, talk about political things or philosophical things or whatever like that?
Gee, I don't know. I think I can't help myself, right? Maybe it's some, a byproduct of like having had, thanks to having had an interdisciplinary education, I have a lot to draw upon and a lot of interests that I'm, quite inquisitive about. So, connecting to all of those different things, whether it's, performing arts, philosophy, theater, political science, like social experiences, like all of those things are nourish me and are how bodies move in space, all of this stuff, right? So all of those questions were a lot more interesting to me in my studies than going into the kind of hermetic experience that we often have in music pedagogy, where it's like, okay, now let's just look at these notes on the page and see what the relationship between them is, like it's so
Hmm.
divorced from how I experienced music going to concerts that I think that can't, like I said, I can't help myself.
Very nice. Well, then we'll go to Jeff, who is, our performer in this. So we always have a composer and then a performer. So we'll talk to Jeff about performing. So you're a flautist, and I think I said that right. I know that people say flutist or flautist. I pick flautist, so I'm just going to go with that one.
You go with whichever you prefer.
Feels
Flutist
good.
in North America tends to happen pretty often too. But
Yeah. So I'll go with flautist. But interested, like how you got into music, kind of what made you do that, and what made you get into new music, and then eventually, want to create your own ensemble, which is Ensemble Paramirabo.
yeah, well, contrary to James, I think my experience with music was actually quite a traditional one. For my parents, it was really important that each of their kids had, the traditional piano lessons. So that's where I started, was on the piano. I hated it. I was terrible. But at home, one of the basic rules was you had to take music lessons. So somehow I wound up at the flute after going to some community band clinic for the instrument, and eventually wound up studying at university. At Wilfrid Laurier was probably where I first really fell in love with new music, and also with the process of collaborating with composers. At Wilfrid Laurier, so it's in Waterloo, Ontario, and every 2 weeks there was a student composers concert. And as of my first year there, for whatever reason, a lot of my social circle included a lot of composers, and since I was a performer, interested and open to playing their works, it became like kind of a ritual every month that I would learn tons of pieces for these student composer concerts. And I think that that's where it started for me. So I did that all through my undergrad. And when I moved to Montreal at the Conservatoire, so the Montreal Conservatoire, I was kind of more in an orchestral profile for the beginning, and the playing new music was something that I didn't have for probably the first 2 years in Montreal, and I really missed it. And that's when I met the other players in Ensemble Paramirabo in a contemporary music class at the Conservatoire. And I've always had sort of I don't know, some kind of desire to start things and to create events. And while I was in my master's, that turned into a concert series that was hosted in my house. It was a loft. And so that sort of snowballed into sort of the ensemble. And Paramirabo grew from there so we're a sextet: flute, clarinet, violin, cello, piano, percussion. And Zach, you've played with us. You're on one of our albums.
This is true.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that through new music, I discovered that I could sort of realize this need that I have to create new things, to mobilize groups, to just get things happening. It's something that I've always, I don't know, it's something that I've always enjoyed.
Cool. So it's interesting. So I guess that's pretty amazing. So you said every 2 weeks at Wilfrid Laurier they had a composers concert. I mean,
I don't know if they still do. I don't know if they still do that, but what it meant actually was that both performers and composers were required super early to learn how to organize rehearsals, how to structure their time, how to get groups together, which is something that later on in life, once we leave school, it becomes something that's, if you don't have those skills, nothing's going to happen for you in the first couple of years out of school. Yeah, I'm very happy that I had that exposure at that point, because I'm sure that life would have been very different after, actually.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, having played with you, like you said, for I think it was between like 2013 and 16, maybe around there, 2015, somewhere in that area. I'll have to say, I remember the first time, because it's like orchestra you get, but it's like chamber music where you don't have a conductor. It was just like, in school you like kind of roll in and be like, I don't know, I'll just wait for somebody to tell me when to come in, and I'll never forget that the first time I came in and I didn't come in right in a rehearsal with you guys, and you're like, Zach, why didn't you come in? I'm like, what bar are we at? And you're like, you don't know where the flute cue, you don't know that violin comes on beat 3 of measure like 47. I'm like, no. And you're like, dude, you got to study the score. I felt so stupid, but I also, that was great because after that, I like never wanted to feel that dumb again. So it was always like, oh man,
no.
I gotta study the score. But it's great because, like you said, then going in, people are like, man, you're really prepared. I'm like, yeah, man, because you don't know. And it's also, I mean, hey, man, it makes the music way better. And it's also, that's your homework. You don't, in school, you kind of do that, in the classroom, but it's like, no, you do that at home, then come to the rehearsal.
Absolutely. And the learning that your context is super important in chamber music. That is, in many ways, even more important than your individual part, is knowing where you fit in your environment. So I hope I wasn't too mean. Was I mean? I'm sorry.
No, like I said, it was a great experience. You're the artistic director. You have to do that. You have to ensure the quality of the ensemble. So yeah, that's your point. So that's interesting too, I guess. So a lot of the new music you did was all, composers and like performers at that time. But so it wasn't something that where you, like, say for me, I heard, trying to think of a piece. Like I heard Xenakis in high school and I said, when I'm going to go to college, I'm going to play Xenakis because he's awesome. But it was more like you discovered new music through commission, new premieres, and then said, hey, let me look back at what's happened before.
I actually discovered the repertoire probably sort of fairly late in my development as a flutist. And for sure, my gateway into contemporary music and contemporary repertoire in general was actually through collaboration, which is maybe a little bit different than the way some people get into it.
Yeah. You never know. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because I don't know, for our listeners, it could be 50-50. It could be, who knows? So cool. Very interesting. So then just talking about Paramirabo again, which is the ensemble that you founded, or did you co-found? Did you do it with?
Co-founded.
I know there were
co-founded.
other people. Yeah.
Co-founded. Mm-hmm. So we've existed for just over 10 years now. And several recordings later, many tours, lots of working with James. Actually,
which is why I picked you too.
Yeah, we've got quite a long history of collaboration with James, both within the ensemble, but also as a soloist. I've done a couple of his pieces.
So I'll get into that in just a second, but just to finish this part off with Paramirabo, what made you want to, or what made that ensemble come together like that? Like, I know there's maybe some other ones, like I think Eighth Blackbird is the same configuration, but was it kind of just you knew you wanted to do that type of ensemble, or was it like, well, that's what flute fits into?
Yeah. No, flute fits into all sorts of things. I'd probably play in a wind quintet if it had been based on what the flute fits into. But
that's true.
It all goes back to that one contemporary music class where the piece that we were working on was Paramirabo by Claude Vivier, and the instrumentation is flute, violin, cello, and piano. So that was the initial. The group actually started as a quartet, and we quickly, as we were looking at repertoire, quickly realized that sort of the Pierrot ensemble formation, so to include a clarinet, and then eventually also to open it up to include percussion as well, just meant that we had so much more repertoire that's available, because that as you mentioned, that instrumentation has become kind of a go-to for contemporary music in terms of sort of that. It's like a bridging group between your sort of 15-piece chamber orchestra and like a string quartet, I guess. It's what happens between the two.
Yep. Cool. Okay, great. So we're already going to this territory. We can talk about how you guys started collaborating. So we'll just start off. First, how did you two meet, and where did that happen, and what started the collaboration, if you can remember the event?
Oh my gosh. You mean you haven't always been there, James?
Right, yeah, it feels that way. Well, for my part, how I remember encountering Ensemble Paramirabo was really that they were like the hot new ensemble in town, like coming to Montreal to study composition and having always been in these kind of like structured frameworks. Like for me, where I did my undergrad, we had no musicians even. It was only a composition program. So they hired professional musicians every term for the student composers to write for. And coming out of that, moving to Montreal was kind of the first time I really like worked with performers of my own age or training level, right? And so we didn't get a lot of that kind of structure at school, and so that's part of the reason that we, a group of composers there, started the Montreal Contemporary Music Lab, which was still ongoing. It's amazing. Summer workshop series
Great initiative.
where composers and performers are brought together to kind of collaborate and talk about collaboration and talk about what makes a healthy collaboration and everything that goes into that kind of thing. Trying to look at professional development and music making from the perspective like by and for emerging artists, right? So I think it may have been through that we first met Paramirabo, that on the very first year, the members independently were performers that were part of the program, and that was the first summer that I was in Montreal, and they kind of got shuffled around and played in different combinations, different composers' works, but did some work together as well. And that's at least how I kind of started to work with them. And then from there, I think it was just we knew who each other were, and I started to do tech for some of their concerts because I started to become known as a person who could handle sound equipment and run live sound for chamber music. So I helped them out with a few shows like that. And I think a little ways down the road, it was Gabrielle Gingras, the original pianist of the ensemble, who, Jeff brought her up to me and said, "I think Gabrielle has something that she wants to say to you," after like one show that we had done together where I was the tech, and she said, "James, would you write us a piece?" And so that was one of my first commissions, actually, really, from an ensemble. I had like maybe a couple before then, but very early kind of, right
And
out
that
of the
was on
gate.
one of our very first programs that completely devoted to commissions. So it was the Perturbation program in 2015.
Right,
something like that.
2015. Yeah, that's true. It was before you were doing a lot of kind of mixed stuff, and now it's almost all you do is all new works. Yeah. So that was great to be involved in that, and from having had a kind of working relationship already through these other things, I felt already quite kind of comfortable with the ensemble and knew what they were capable of. And so like right out of the get-go, I thought this is a group that I can make things happen with and I can take risks with. And so from the beginning, I've always just felt so empowered and excited to work with this group. And I think that we feed off of that energy. I mean, I think Jeff describes himself well as somebody who like really likes to make things happen and make events and make people feel invited. And so that just working with that energy is so inspiring and motivating.
Yeah, the feeling's mutual though, because I remember very clearly that one of the first things that you did with us in working towards that first piece, Among Ama, you had us all in a small room at the conservatory recording. I remember there being a fight scene. I remember there was their footsteps throwing things. Anyway, it was this
all kinds of malarkey.
Exactly. This very I don't know. I think we felt so. We trusted you to go places that maybe we wouldn't have with someone else, perhaps.
So that's crazy. That was the first one. I didn't realize that because I think I remember playing something. I forget, it was a room somewhere where it was like an audition, and I think it was for Paramirabo. I wasn't playing in it, I don't think, or maybe I played one piece, but I think we played that because I remember helping you set up the equipment, James, and I can't remember where it was. But now I'm thinking about it, I was like, that probably was 2015. Wow.
Yeah, well,
It's like
I don't know whether that was the premiere or not that you would have helped. Maybe you did, but we definitely played that piece a lot in the subsequent years. It's one of from our repertoire. It's probably one of the pieces that we perform the most frequently, actually.
And similarly, it's, I think, my most performed work of chamber music. So that just goes to show the kind of strength of the collaboration that we have, and the kind of risk taking that we do, because I wrote that work very much with the idea this will never be played again. You know, we say in new music, often the world premiere is often also the world derniere. But like with this piece, I went in with that, like, okay, this is how it is. You know, I'm not going to try to like minimize my vision for this to make it something that's transportable. I'm obsessed with this space that the work was going to be premiered in, the Chapelle Historique de Bon Pasteur. I want to use the back room and do these funny things with like the players moving between the two spaces and reflections in the glass, and I want to put speakers in weird places. And so all these things in the piece where it's like, this is a site-specific work and probably it'll never be played again. And since then, it's, you know, Jeff's come up with all kinds of interesting solutions for ways of replicating the experience or transforming the experience of the work into other spaces. And I've had to do the same since more and more groups are wanting to play it all over the world. So it's, thanks to Jeff's fearlessness in part that I felt emboldened to take risks with this work. And that energy we have together makes, I think, makes the magic happen. So it's great to work with them.
So just for the listeners, so this is just to say the piece, it's called Among Am Ah, is correct?
Yeah,
that's right.
So three words. And can we talk about maybe just the piece for other people and they can listen to it online, but maybe what did you guys do when you collaborated with it? Like, did you do workshops on it, or was it kind of like, here's the piece and just ask me some questions? And then just maybe we can talk about the work too, like what makes it interesting for you, James, and also Jeff, and what it entails, you know, just for people who haven't listened to it yet.
Sure. My recollection is there was a bit of a workshop process I think we hadn't really formalized how we approached collaborations at that stage. I think we were sort of stumbling through it along with the premiere of that work, and actually the whole concert that was the Perturbation initial premieres concert, basically, for Ensemble Paramirabo. So I remember that there were those recording sessions for sure. I also remember rehearsals that happened in Gabriel's brother's house with a dog on the ground. You remember that?
Yeah, totally.
Because you know, a young new music ensemble, we couldn't afford anything, so
and I even remember bringing like everything into that little home, kind of maybe unnecessarily. Like everyone had a mic, we had like cables running everywhere. I had all the speakers there, and it was kind of like, we don't necessarily need to test all of this out before we get into space, but when you're young,
although
right?
There was a lot, like there are speakers inside the piano, like there were certain aspects that you did need the tech there to
totally. Well, and especially there were so many things in that piece that were a big experiment for me, and so, you know, now when I work on a piece like that, I kind of can imagine a bit more what it will work like technologically, and not necessarily have to cart all the gear to every single rehearsal. But with that one, I think, I really latched on to that open-mindedness that the ensemble had, and how, you know, gung-ho they were to do everything. So I don't know whose idea it was to do the recording session, but like it immediately was like, okay, let's, you know, try to do something pre-compositional and work together. And, you know, taking those recordings, they not only work their way into the electronic part of the piece, like Jeff was saying, I asked them to have an argument, kind of a little fight scene, and that is heard in a very muffled context, like off stage, and the speaker that's behind the doors that enter into the concert hall. And all these little like creaks and groans and stuff, and chairs and unwrapping candies and things like that, sounds that are kind of, you normally hear in a concert hall, right, are sort of simulated in the speaker that's underneath the audience, right? So had the idea.
The piece actually, you have like two worlds that collide, actually, because there's the experience of being a listener in a concert where, yes, you hear the performer, but you also hear those extraneous noises that aren't part of a performance normally. But within Among Emma, those two things meet, and it's like it's not possible to distinguish which is which. So those sounds that are actually sort of almost an irritant sometimes, become part of the performance.
It's almost John Cagean in a bit, yeah.
Totally, yeah. And we have lots
Yeah.
of examples of experimental composers who are really interested in this kind of thing. Like there are like Michael Pissarro pieces where you're meant to leave the window open, right, so you can hear what's happening outside. And so, we're beyond the first, far from the first to think about these things. But I was really interested in the way that space and this ensemble kind of invited that. And for me, using electronics to try to really kind of make this weird, uncanny simulation of those experiences where it's clear at some points where things are fake, right? Like there's a knock at the door at one point, and it felt so real, even rehearsing it, that the person who ran the space came running in, like, "What is it?" And it's like, "Oh no, this is part of the piece," right? But in one performance later, like you kind of get the joke quickly enough, and there are things in the piece like the pianist knocks on the lid of the piano in the same rhythm. It's kind of like it becomes very clear the artifice of it, right? So I think even in one performer, I had like an audience member who knocked on the wall or something like that to play along. But
like, stop. No, you're ruining it.
yeah, for sure. I wanted to look at the poetry and beauty of these accidental sounds that are normally annoying, but when you do it, it's annoying for real.
Yeah, right. It's become annoying again. Well, cool. So that's the first one. And so it's actually interesting. So what's the most recent one that you guys have worked on? Because I know, like, I was listening to Alone and Unalone, which you guys did. I don't know if there's something more recent that you all have done together, but that one is interesting too when you talk about incidental sounds, or I'm not sure because I haven't heard it maybe with the earbuds in, but maybe talk about that one and how has that changed from the first time you guys did a collaboration to now, I mean, 6 years later, maybe 5 years. So what's the differences? What have you guys learned, in collaborating with each other, and what do you do more proficiently, I guess,
Yeah, well, I think that on our end anyway, we've adjusted how we approach working with composers and sort of the time and the way things are structured with the rehearsal process as well. So Alone and Unalone is not the most recent of our collaborations, though, but we can talk about that after.
It's just the most recent one that I could kind of see, but I think it's 2019, so it's probably, yeah.
God, it's old news now.
Right.
It's old news now, Zach.
Oh my gosh, so much has transpired.
So what is the most recent one, actually, so you could tell us? And
should we go
correct me.
chronologically? Yeah, let's first talk about Alone and Unalone.
Yeah.
Sure, okay, there we go.
So this was created in the context of Jeff had the wild idea, or the ensemble had the wild idea, to start a carte blanche series where they, I'm not the only composer that they've had, long-term relationships with, and so they've been able to make a series of concerts where they invite a composer into the curatorial process and say, you can program a concert. We'll commission a new work of yours, play at least one other existing works. In my case, they had already commissioned a work, and so it was nice to kind of have that poetry and make sort of a sequel to it in a way. And I thought of the work a little bit like that. Even the opening, it starts with a tape solo where there's just electronics. The stage is dark, and that's transformed sounds from the ending of Among Ama. So I really thought of it as kind of taking what we accomplished together in Among Ama as a point of departure. And so it was in this context of a carte blanche show where there was a premiere. We're not playing Among Ama actually on that concert, but two other works of mine. And we had already done a cross-Canada tour together, similar to the one that you were on before, Zach, with the ensemble, where they had their collaboration with the Thin Edge New Music Collective, another sextet of the same formation, though they have variable formation, in Toronto. And in that case, each of the ensembles propose a work for the other to commission, and I was the proposed composer for Thin Edge, so I wrote a new work for that formation. And then Paramirabo had the chance to play it on this show. And so, it almost feels like a work for them in that way, because it was kind of, they were on tour for the whole creation of it, but not quite. So, if we count how many pieces we've actually made together, it's a bit blurry in that way. But with Alone and Unalone, similarly, okay, we can take risks together. So I really want to do this piece where all the audience has headphones. And so in that work, and in the most kind of DIY way, rather than trying to do it wireless or anything like that, I bought a whole bunch of headphone amplifiers and laid them underneath the seat of the audience, daisy chained them together, and bought hundreds of earbud headphones that are, plugged in individually. And so the whole audience has these earbud headphones and can hear certain sounds that are amplified from the ensemble at different moments, different electronics that kind of come in and out and move between the interior space that you're listening to in the headphones versus the shared space of the concert hall, whether that's acoustic or electroacoustic. And so you have all these different dimensions of spatiality with a piece, and that involves also like this same kind of disruption of the theater, of the concert, the ritual. Performers walk on stage bit by bit. They have these kind of theatrical things that they need to do, working with everyday objects that are amplified. They whisper and they rub paper into the microphones. The piece is very inspired by ASMR. So yeah, these kinds of things.
Yeah, I thought that one was very interesting. Like I was saying, that that experience, which I don't know if that's new or, like you said, somebody has explored that before, but I think that's very cool to have this very personal experience. I guess I've seen it with like silent concerts at like music festivals where they'll have people wear headphones or something like that, and you don't see anything. And I'm talking about like EDM concerts. I don't know if it was Bonnaroo that did that or something like that, but yeah, that's pretty interesting to have that personal experience. And I think it's interesting too because I had that idea, but again, I heard this recently on a podcast or something. It's like ideas are a dime a dozen. Actually doing them, executing is what matters. So I never did this, but I always thought that would be interesting if you did that with radio and you could switch between signals and hear different aspects of the work. But that seems like a lot of work. So, but if you ever want to take that idea, you can do it. It just seems like, yeah, probably easier, like you said, very DIY to just be like, I'm just going to daisy chain this and make this work.
I think for the audience, though, in that piece, what it creates is this part of one of the most interesting aspects of the experience is the 3D aspect to listening, which means that some of the sounds are super, super, super close because they're in the audience members' ears, but you also still have that experience of being at a concert, and the fact that the two coexist is something that I think you don't normally get even in mixed works.
Yeah, because it's like the speakers way over there, and then the ensembles in the front, and now you have something that's like
Even
here.
closer, yeah, in your
Yeah,
head,
and
basically.
which that's, I mean, like you said, spatiality, even like, because you can kind of, I think if people watch that Earcam forum video that I watched you talk about, James, where you can kind of say, oh, you can kind of get away with that, a little bit with like frequency spectrum. If it's like really high, it's like makes it feel like it's closer, or lower things don't come as close to you. You can get away with that kind of trickery, but this is like actually like, yeah, it's right there in your earbud, instead. So very
In
cool.
your brain.
But we've had to think about those kinds of, that trickery, and how to simulate those experiences, because these are concert works. But the next thing we did in our collaboration after this show was to go the very next week, I think, into the studio and record a record that included this piece plus the other ones that we had worked on. So immediately faced with this, like, what are these pieces if you don't have all this theatricality, if you don't have this different kind of spatialization? And so we had to come up with all kinds of funny solutions to make the pieces exist differently on the recorded medium. And that involved like being in the studio and recording footsteps and chairs squeaking and things like that, which kind of a nice full circle experience from that initial recording session of Among Emma as part of the compositional process. And it's like, okay, now those things we recorded so long ago made it into the electronics of the piece and then into the score for what the performers have to do. And now we're recording it again for this other recorded document. So there was something beautiful about that poetry of experience for that project, be able to kind of come back into the studio on the other end of it and make something together.
But for us to delve even deeper into your work, James, because yes, by that stage, yet we commissioned the two works, but it also opened the door to really explore all of your quintets and sextets that you had at that particular time. I know that there have been a few written since.
Right. Yeah. As you were saying, the formation that you have is really one of the most common for new music. So I think it's the seventh Pierrot percussion piece that I finished most recently. So.
Well, before we talk about the newest one, like you said we were going to, but that's actually a question I had, and I didn't go down to it, but you kind of touched on that. That's interesting. How did you actually do that in the recording studio? Because I think you said that there was 3 groups of people, like in ear like groups that you could do, and I'm guessing that you had to pick one of them, correct? Because you can't have the experience of everybody. That's just part of the thing. So you have to, I guess, pick and choose. So what did you do in that case to make this what were the techniques you used to make this work on a record?
Well, as far as that is concerned, you're right to say that in the piece there are 3 different listening groups, and like at one moment, one group will hear like the sounds of cloth against Viviana's cello, while somebody else hears Victor take apart his clarinet and whisper into the microphone. And another group will hear Jeff take apart his flute and talk about that into the microphone, right? But in the record, you hear all of it, right? And so it's kind of a more omniscient listening experience than you get in the concert, except for me, because when I mix the piece live, I have headphones in as well, and I get all of the signals. So if anything, you're stimulating the composer's ear view into the piece, if you like, for the record. I was just going to say that, like, it's interesting to see a work like that. Same thing with Among Emma, where it's like, this will probably never be played again, and thinking that experience is so, unique to the headphone listening environment that is this going to work in other contexts? And just recently, it was picked up as the soundtrack to a new dance film by the choreographer Edward Locke of La 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 Human Steps, and so that was something kind of fell out of the sky that, there's this choreographer who heard this work. And it's amazing how well it fits with the dance. Like, it's like they were made for each other. And it's such a beautiful collaboration that was totally not expected, from this thing where it really exists in the concert hall and should be heard in this way, to now it's the soundtrack on this, beautiful film where it gets to have a completely different kind of life. So
Cool. So what's the newest one then you guys were saying? So Alone and Unalone is not the most recent. So what is the most recent thing you guys have worked to get together on?
So we just got back from a tour in France, actually, I guess a couple weeks ago, on a project called Confluence, which involved Paramirabo plus 2 French ensembles, so Proxima Centauri and Hanatsu Mirror, from Bordeaux and Strasbourg, respectfully. And we commissioned James to write a piece for the 14 musicians with this time, so electronics, but also video.
Well, it's such an interesting opportunity coming from having, by this point, as you can imagine, this very in-depth collaboration with this one ensemble, and as Jeff has said, by this point, we had already worked together on a couple of solo pieces, and knowing so intimately a third of an ensemble versus 2 groups that I didn't know at all. I'd heard of them, I'd never met them, I'd never seen them play, and they had, of course, wonderful reputations, but kind of trying to fit together this quite funny instrumentation where you have 3 flutes, clarinet, saxophone, 3 percussion, piano, digital keyboard, and then violin, viola, cello, and a dedicated electronics performer in the group, right? So between the 3 ensembles, this is what you get, which is like a kind of lopsided sort of, sinfonietta chamber ensemble kind of thing, right? And
it's just a whole lot of flute, which is great.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely great. Thanks to Jeff, I've written so much flute music. I've almost become like what you could call a capital F, capital C flute composer somehow, which is a lot of fun. And I just love writing for the instrument more and more. When you have a performer like Jeff, who is just so fearless and so powerful, it's a lot of fun. And so in this work, I wanted to give everybody different times to shine. There are all these little solos in the piece, and that, felt kind of interesting and risky, like knowing some people really well and not knowing other people really well. But in that same spirit of risk, like, okay, I know at least I have, a third of these people on my side and on board, and I'm sure that the others will be just as fearless. So I want to do something new again with this work, and it being one of the very first pieces that, kind of came out of the gate, being able to do concerts again after the long pause of the pandemic lockdowns. I had all this energy into working with video in me because I'd been making a lot of sort of online works that were multimedia because I was not able to work in concert pieces for a while. And that really kind of scratched an old itch, going back to my background, having studied film before studying music, and that always being something that I wanted to do. Uh, this was a chance, like, okay, like I want to make something that feels like a short film, but has, this huge chamber virtuosity of 3 different groups playing together with it. And can I make this happen? Right. I think that I can with, the people that I'm working with. So, yeah, huge experiment, huge learning experience, but, put all our heart and soul into it. And I think we really pulled something off that was, really a lot of fun to work on with 4 other amazing composers, 1 other from Montreal and 3 that are based in France. And so exciting to go on this tour in France and Quebec with these amazing people.
An amazing experience because also the aspect of international collaboration was really interesting as well. Different ways of working, different ways of approaching the rehearsal process, for example. The project had a full 10 days at Loara, which is basically a devoted residency space in Bordeaux for the creation of new projects. So we had the lights, we had the staging director, we had everything going on all at the same time for 10 days. So it's quite a trip.
Wow.
Quite a trip.
Yeah, to think about, as you're saying, Jeff, when you're first starting this, like putting on concerts in your home, like the
It wasn't
DIY
quite the
stage
same.
to like, and for myself as somebody who works with technology in my own work, coming from the place of setting everything up yourself, searching for materials as cheaply as possible and, just trying to make these ambitious things happen. And for the 2 of us, I think in our projects, we're always like way more ambitious than our wallets or our health could maintain, and we kind of have pushed ourselves. But it really felt like such a luxury and such a, just so grateful for the chance that we can kind of come all this way to a point where we have, this beautiful new space to, work on in residency for 2 weeks in Bordeaux. And like I was saying with the electronics in Proxima Centauri, there's a dedicated electronics performer, Christophe Havel, who, just knowing that there was somebody there taking care of that so that, I didn't have to be constantly worrying about the electronics myself, allowed me to go further and say like, okay, well, add video, just add something else for me to obsess over and fret about, right? So, yeah, I think that's part of what makes this collaboration so rich, is that we keep pushing ourselves farther and getting more and more resources to be able to dream bigger and bigger. And I'm just so grateful for that.
Wow, very cool. So that actually fits into great to one of the questions I had. So you're talking about collaborating with other people, in different countries, different whatever. So I haven't been in Montreal in a while, and some of our listeners, and a lot of it's right now in Tampa, so they maybe have never been to Montreal. But what's the culture like right now in Montreal with music? I'm guessing it's gotten better, but I mean, how do you guys feel about it right now? What's special about Montreal?
Yeah, I think we're, as I'm sure is the case elsewhere, we're going through a really interesting time right now where things are shifting. There's like a generational shift in terms of leadership in the larger institutions.
Like
That
old guard, new guard kind of thing, something like that?
kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the pandemic kind of accelerated
Mm-hmm.
that process. There's a lot of movement right now, and I think that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to see sort of what the scene will look like in 2-3 years, because for its size, Montreal has a very sort of effervescent and active new music scene that ranges from sort of DIY experiences all the way to several large ensembles that are like Ensemble Contemporain de Montréal or Nouvel Ensemble Moderne, that are really devoted to either commissioning or repertoire, contemporary repertoire, respectively. Or the Société de Musique Contemporaine du Québec, so the SMCQ, that is a large presenter of contemporary music. So there's the whole range going on in the city all at once, and it all kind of coexists. I find it a really exciting place to be artistically. I don't know about you, James.
It's such an exciting place to be, and that's, of course, what drew me there and why I wanted to move here to make work and be an artist here and study here. And it's an exciting time in Montreal too. As Jeff was saying, there's a lot of opening. Old institutions are transitioning, and Jeff is hugely a part of that. Talk about a new guard coming in. He was just appointed as co-artistic director of Le Vivier, which is a big diffuser of new music in Montreal. A lot of different ensembles and organizations are members of this organization, where they produce concerts and act as a kind of a conduit and make a lot of international exchanges happening. So the huge organization in Montreal that's developed since the time that we've been here, and it's been such an active force for making events happen and making collaborations happen. And now Jeff's at the helm of that. He also mentioned Ensemble Contemporain de Montréal, which has been an amazing contemporary music ensemble that's been in the city for how long? 30 years? More than that, 35.
Years, yeah.
And so they're just rounding off their tenure and kind of closing their doors of official productions. But one of their big contributions to Canadian music has been this Génération tour that both Jeff and I were a part of in 2018, where the ensemble tours across the country, often 8 or more different cities, and commissions works by 4 young composers. Jeff has played flute in that group quite a bit, and now the baton has been passed off, metaphorically speaking, to his Ensemble Paramirabo, and they're going to take on this cross-Canada biannual tour. And so Jeff has a lot on his plate, but if there's anybody who's up for it, he is, as you've heard, So there's so much exciting stuff that's going on in the city, and we have Jeff to thank for being part of that.
But the Génération project is a very exciting one, and as James mentioned, we both participated in that. It's really a platform for national exposure for the 4 composers that are selected, because they really, as James had mentioned, often in new music, it's a one-off deal where you perform the piece once and it's done. In this case, it actually tours across the country, and the idea, hopefully, is that the next editions of it will actually not only tour across the country, but that we'll also be able to take the works internationally as well.
Cool. That's very cool. So what was the ensemble that you said did it before? And
it's the ECM, the Ensemble Contemporain de Montréal, so the Montreal Contemporary.
You said that they're done, or they're just done doing this Generations?
So their artistic director, Véronique Lacroix, has announced that the concert in May will be the last one ish for the ensemble, and specifically that the Génération competition will be spearheaded by Paramirabo for the next edition.
That's interesting. Just to hear that, because I, like you said, that group's been around forever and all this stuff. So that's it's very exciting.
They're a pillar of commissioning not just Montreal, like really central to the entire national scene, I would say.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't only commission Quebec composers, but really make an effort to be representative about their programming. It's a big loss actually for the new music community. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next, because I think that the role of a larger ensemble that does commissioning is really important to maintain in sort of the ecosystem or whatever of contemporary music nationally in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can relate to that in the States, where it's similarly a huge country with very diverse scenes all over the place. To have the idea that there would be an ensemble that commissions a composer from New York, Florida, California, Illinois, whatever, like any of these places, and then tour the country with it, right? I know these things happen, but it was very rare in Canada to have this kind of experience. And yeah, huge project that we have a lot to be grateful for. And so it's super exciting that it continues with Paramirabo.
Yeah. Cool. Very interesting. Well, I guess we can end, start wrapping up our conversations. So usually I guess what I ask at the end is, what do you guys have planned for yourself? But it sounds like we've kind of heard a lot of maybe what Jeff has in store.
But no, it's James's turn though. What's
there you
coming
go.
up for you, James?
Well, we'll continue to, it aligns very well into this. We continue to work together. And so the next piece that I'm working on is for this last concert with Ensemble Paramirabo in May. And Jeff's playing on that show, I think. Two flutes in the band, so Jeff's one of them. And it only just recently was announced that this will be their last official show. So got a sense of the wind in my sails, if you like, for working on this piece. That'll be soon. Apart from that, at the beginning I mentioned getting back into electronic dance music, and so I have my first album in this genre coming out in January with Xylem Records. They're an experimental electronic label based in Falmouth in Wales, and a lot of their stuff is to do with live coding or kind of dark ambient, and then my record's a little bit kind of dancey in a way, sort of industrial vaporwave, if you like. I don't know. But that's exciting. And otherwise, keeping going with lots and lots of projects. I'm a busy composer, so I have a lot to be grateful for as far as that goes. And yeah.
Cool. I want to hear your classical stuff or whatever contemporary art music, but I really want to listen to your IDM or EDM stuff or whatever the genre is that you say. But yeah, that's interesting stuff. I've always liked Audica or like Venetian snares and all that kind of cool.
Sure. Love it.
I guess we should also mention that there's in fall of 2022, if all goes as planned, I'll be releasing my first solo flute album actually, and two of James's pieces will be on that album. So we've actually already done the studio time for it.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's recorded.
Mix the recordings.
It's already recorded.
Yeah. So are those with electronics, or are they just pure flute, or are they all mixed works?
Oh, they're with electronics.
Yeah, okay. That's what I figured, but figured I should ask. Cool. So that's it. That's up for you, Jeff, is the flute thing. I mean, that's all you got going on is the flute, and
No, there's lots going on, but that's for me individually, definitely the solo album.
The highlight.
Getting that all I figured out is pretty much the highlight. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, unless there's anything else you guys would want to mention, I think we're good to go. So
I guess I'll just put in a last plug.
Sure.
Just drawing the thread. One of the pieces on that record that was co-commissioned by Jeff, Doubt is a Way of Knowing. It will be performed in Montreal in February. It's part of a series of works that I've done for solo instruments, all with Doubt in the title. And so those 4 works in the series so far will all be collected together in a concert in Montreal. And Jeff's, in fact, the only local performer for that. We've got 2 people coming from Toronto and 1 person coming from Tennessee. So hopefully we can make it happen with the border and everything. But
yeah, with the Tennessee thing. Yep. Well, I hope you guys, I would like to see you, hopefully, if our festival goes well in March so it's called Contemporary Art Music Project Camp, that's sponsoring this podcast and all that. If we, keep in the wind in our sails, like you said, we keep on going and going, hopefully we can get you guys down. That would be amazing to.
That'd be amazing.
I know. I got to pull down people from Florida. If we do, or from other places to Florida. So if we do it, in February, we'll get a lot of people, I'm sure. So
we have snow during that period. I'm coming. I'll be there.
Exactly.
It'd be a great time to go to Florida.
You'll take the 75-degree Fahrenheit weather. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. And it was great talking to you all.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, Zach.